Good morning and welcome. We're glad to have Pat McGuigan with us this morning, especially I know this is an exciting time of year for you. You love it. We have the State of the State this year. We have the start of the legislative session, but we need Pat to help us kind of sort through some of the stuff that's going on. And let's talk today about the state of the state. And the question I have for you is, we've gotten accustomed to a Democratic governor presenting a budget, and at the same time they do the state of the state, and that by the time the budget's finally passed, it looks completely different. Now we've got all Republicans. Is the budget that Mary Fallin presented going to go through unchanged, or is there going to be a lot of work done to it?
Well, there'll be some work done to it. I guess to be fair to Governor Henry, it's an old saw at the Capitol that governors' executive budgets are works of fiction. So it goes back to the Keating era and long before, because the legislature in Oklahoma is supreme, basically. It's more powerful than probably the judiciary and the executive combined. So that's a preface. Now to get down into it, I have fun with things like this because I try to distill it down. And so I kept asking the question of all the players up there, is this a work of fiction or is it real? And that's what I can report to you is Senator Bingman, the President Pro Tem in the Senate, said it's a good framework, good starting point. House Speaker Steele said it's a serious starting point. Rice, I've described Rice and some of the other Democrats as warily supportive of the general framework, concerned about pieces. I'm referring to Senator Rice, the minority leader. He said it was well thought out, carefully crafted, comments like that. Now, to get into some of the particulars, most agencies are going to take a 5% budget cut. The effect on some of the agencies in terms of consolidations might be a little higher than that. The protected agencies, as they're called, education, public service, health and human services, more in the 3% range. Those are numbers that are digestible to members of the legislature, and that's why the response, I think, has been pretty positive. The question is it enough? Is it enough? Some of the criminal justice reforms that are being talked about with alternatives to incarceration are very significant, but those are more long-term in terms of any cost savings, and they're just more humane and some cost gains in the short term. So it's a very interesting budget. It's going to be tough because of the proposals for supplementals, for corrections, and for the Health Care Authority this year. $3 million in the case of corrections, $15 million for the Health Care Authority. That's going to be tough to do. The tax rate reduction of 1/4% is going to be allowed to go into effect. That has a budget impact,
sure
but in the long term, the belief is it also has a multiplying effect because of the income generation. So there's a framework, a positive response for the most part on the part of legislative leaders. And the real question becomes the various consolidations and the information technology, centralization, some of the purchasing changes, those certainly will save money. Will they save enough to make this a balanced budget when these guys get done in late May? I don't know.
We certainly remember Governor Henry trying to hold certain departments harmless in his difficult budgets. Is Mary Fallin trying to do the same thing here?
She appears to be doing that. Now, the battle in terms of education, for example, is going to be, she is projecting some administrative compacting or consolidation, that dirty word, but to try to bring some efficiencies on the administrative and non-instructional end in public education. That'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And then there's the policy assets. We haven't really touched on some policy changes, although all of this affects policy. The big one on education, of course, is going to be further steps towards school choice, and then giving more power to the superintendent of public instruction, now Janet Barisi, so that her powers mirror those of other elected executives rather than being under the control of a board. The board will remain,
right,
but there's discussion of some really substantial changes, and I should mention Fallin made a point of stressing that in her speech. She was very supportive of not only Barisi, but also of Phyllis Hudecki in some of the early maneuverings. So this is, again, generally very positive response. We'll see what the particulars are as you get explicit language being examined more closely.
Okay, so I know this isn't what you normally do. You don't do opinion, but I can ask you here. So do you think this budget, this executive budget, is fiction, or do you think that this is real?
Oh boy.
I put you on the spot there.
Let's call it a based on fact.
Okay.
If we could write the story ahead of time, we'd say that this is a work that is based on fact. It's a real world-oriented budget. The question is it enough? I think the impression I have very quickly is that the Fallin folks believe that they can gain a lot from the consolidation, the IT, and some of these administrative changes and do fairly modest budget cuts and reach the goal. That remains to be seen, and that's the tough part. Bingman, for example, was very wary of whether or not there's enough money to do those supplementals this year. So that's a summary of it. I will say that everyone except Education, Public Safety, and Health and Human Services, all the other agencies have to be concerned because they're facing another round of fairly significant cuts. Yeah.
Pat, thank you.
Yeah.
Of course, you can always read more at CapitolBeatOK.com. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next week.
Nothing there is a word.